For the Hansard transcript, would you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Hi, my name is Petra Ahrens-Murray. I'm here as a delegate of the ASU.
I'm Deborah Anderson. I'm a union delegate for the ASU.
My name's Angus McFarland, Assistant Secretary of the ASU New South Wales and ACT branch.
My name's Linda White. I'm Assistant National Secretary of the Australian Services Union.
My name's Emmeline Gasky. I'm a National Campaign Coordinator at the Australian Services Union.
My name's Trudy Slade. I'm a union delegate.
Excellent name. Could you please confirm that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses and evidence has been provided to you?
Yes.
Thank you. The committee has your submission. I now invite each of you, perhaps not each of you, but perhaps you to make an short opening statement. And at the conclusion of your remarks, I'll invite members of the committee to put questions to you.
Thank you very much. I'll make an opening statement, as will our delegates will make short opening statements as they're frontline workers.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. I should say at the outset, ASU members want to make sure the NDIS is the best that it can be. ASU members support robust quality and safeguarding arrangements to ensure that the NDIS supports are delivered to a high standard. However, we have serious concerns about the bill and the extent to which it will ensure people with disability have access to quality and safe supports. First, we must draw the committee's attention to the fact that there has been no consultation with disability workers or their representatives in relation to this bill or the draft code of conduct that has been circulated by the Department of Social Services. The bill in section 73 V proposes to impose fines of up to $52,500 on individual workers, yet no one has actually engaged the workforce on the elements contained in the bill or the code of conduct. To ensure the efficiency of the quality and safeguarding arrangements, there needs to be buy-in from the workforce. This is more likely to happen when the workforce are treated as a partner in the development of the scheme, rather than having a scheme that they were not involved in developing imposed upon them. Secondly, there is no baseline level of quality assurance that is provided for in the bill, as not all providers of supports are required to be registered, and the obligations of registered providers will not apply to them. We consider that this brings a significant risk to the scheme. In our view, the starting position must be that all providers of supports under the NDIS should be registered. Thirdly, the bill is entirely silent on what workers can expect in the event a complaint is made in relation to their conduct or an investigation is commenced. In our view, at a minimum, the legislation needs to be clear that workers will be afforded procedural fairness following a complaint or during an investigation, and this must be a requirement that any investigation is completed as soon as practicable. Fourthly, we are concerned that this legislation is entirely focused on dealing with incidents after they occur, rather than proactively focusing on workforce skills and quality of supports. The obligations set out in the bill and the draft code of conduct will require workers to continuously develop new skills and qualifications relevant to the diverse needs of individual clients. However, there is currently no person-centred professional development plan for the NDIS workforce. Current training arrangements for NDIS workers are wholly inadequate in our view. Further, as you will have seen in the University of New South Wales research report on pricing that has been provided to the committee, there is little ability for NDIS workers to access supervision and training under current NDIS price settings. In our view, in addition to the registration and complaints function, the Quality and Safeguarding Commission should have additional responsibilities for workforce development, skills and training. Of course, the Commission must be resourced to fulfil this responsibility. If I can turn now to pricing. NDIS pricing arrangements need to account for time for workers and providers to meet their quality and safeguarding obligations. It's critical that the measures to ensure quality and safety are not introduced in a vacuum. As it presently stands, the quality and safeguarding arrangements appear to be divorced from the NDIS funding model. NDIS pricing only allows for 3 minutes an hour of a worker's time to be spent on non-client facing work. Already we can see how this will cause problems for compliance with the draft code of conduct. For example, the expectation contained in the draft code that providers must offer reasonable supervision is limited by the fact that there is inadequate time and funding for supervision built into the NDIS pricing model, as I've described. Another example is the expectation for workers to keep detailed and comprehensive records. 3 minutes an hour is inadequate to allow for the administration that may be required, let alone training and supervision requirements. Finally, we're concerned that there is so little said about the Code of Conduct and the practice standards in the bill. This makes it difficult to properly provide meaningful feedback on the scheme that will apply to the workforce because so little is currently known about it. We consider there needs to be an overarching framework provided for in the bill, and the consideration of the bill should not occur before the development of practice standards is further progressed in our view. Our delegates are here to represent members across the country. They are not here to talk on behalf of or represent their employers, but they would like to say a few things about their experience with the NDIS to date and the issues that they have observed. Deb Anderson will speak first, then Petra, and then Trudy. So over to you, Deb.
Okay, thank you. I've been in the disability sector for just over 10 years. I am currently a local area coordinator in the disability sector. One of my real concerns is I worry with the rollout of the NDIS, the level of formal training and skills building to meet the requirements of frontline workers. I believe it falls short of the Code of Conduct and safeguards set out by the NDIS. And I have an example of that, which I just would like to quickly outline for you. So that is staff being trained on the floor by other staff, not by a formal separate entity. A prime example of that is administration of medications. So the flow-on effect of basically being trained in something that is so important by another staff member could be detrimental, as it's very similar to Chinese whispers. When you've got someone on the floor training someone else that trains someone else that trains someone else, it doesn't usually look exactly the same as the first person that was trained. There's pieces missed, and basically that can be quite detrimental to a participant, their family, and in turn the worker, because it leaves them open for mistakes where things aren't being followed and there's no guidelines around that training formally. Basically, I believe this can be avoided by organisations being provided the support to roll out the adequate training in any sector to eliminate any of mistraining. Basically, none of us on the floor are trained to be a trainer. So that's one of my real main concerns for frontline workers in the sector.
Thank you for this opportunity. I've spent all my working life in social services, 17 of those years in disability services in various roles, and recently as a coordinator of supports in the trial area, so since the first conception. I've noticed specifically a drop in clinical supervision. So before I used to do coordination of support and also looked after hiring and supporting individual support workers. These workers are those who support people with disabilities out in the communities. They don't work in teams, they don't work in houses with supports, but out there directly working with the person and nobody to fall back onto. It used to be practice that they had clinical supervision provided, so conversations about how to best provide services, what works well, what didn't work well, where they might have doubts about practice, how can they resource further education, information, and that was at a pro rata, depending on how many hours they worked, of an hour per month for full-time work. I think it's crucial, or it's been crucial, for that to be provided also because those workers, and more workers, support workers nowadays, don't come with a background and experience or an education around those issues. Many are just starting out in the field. And what I've noticed strongly that nowadays, and I believe that's a pricing issue from the NDIA, that these supports are not provided anymore. So the clinical supervision has fallen away. We also used to provide quite lengthy introductions to make sure that the worker knew exactly what was expected. And that has also fallen away, just leaving now attending to emergencies. So when something has gone wrong, then that conversation is reported back and then gets addressed as just a problem-solving exercise. I'm really concerned about that trend and that this is happening, and a part of that is too that the discussions of best practice have fallen away and it's just about filling the hours and providing the workers.
Thank you very much.
My name's Trudy. I've been in the disability sector since 2008. I've been in multiple roles from support worker through to service manager. My experience since the NDIS has commenced to roll out relates to training specifically. I've noticed that face-to-face training has dropped and there's been a huge increase in online training. I believe this has occurred due to the direct support costs, which reflect 3 minutes within every hour of off-the-floor support. The NDIS pricing model does not reflect the actual time necessary for quality off-the-floor support, such as training and writing critical case notes and liaising with other people. The quality of the off-the-floor supports, such as training, are important for quality supports to the people and the customers through the NDIS. Online training has its place. However, my worry is for the circumstances surrounding online training. Some of the things that are occurring right now are that employees are doing this training within their own time. They're using computers either in the office or at their home to complete this training, so there's no way to monitor if that employee is actually the person completing the training. The training is a series of ABC, multiple choice responses, or a yes or no, which means it's pass or fail. With online training compared to face-to-face training, it means that you can't gauge that person's strengths or weaknesses. The floor for open discussion around how things are going to be implemented in a practical way is no longer there because you do not have that face-to-face time with someone. And when a worker's weaknesses and strengths can't be identified, you can't pinpoint and target specific training they may need. My worry is about the costings. They're hugely underestimated, which has a flow-on effect to the quality of support that is provided. If the quality of training decreases, the quality of support will decrease.
Thank you very much. Senator Brown?
Thank you, and thank you all for your opening statements. Do you think the legislation before us will support workers to meet the code of conduct and continue best practice? I've understood what you've said here today, but what do you think needs to change?
I think it's many things need to change. I think that we are uncertain about the code of conduct. I think it would be fair to say that the discussion paper that we've seen from the Department of Social Security has caused a lot of concern among workers when they become aware of it. As brief as it is, I think that it is very difficult for people who to understand what it means because it isn't detailed enough to understand what is expected of them. As our members have also suggested to you, the pricing system does not support the sort of things that we presume the Code of Conduct wants to achieve. There is little for training, there is little time for supervision, and there seems to be very onerous things put on to workers in particular. No, it's not a small thing to be fined a maximum $52,500, which is what this legislation proposes as its maximum. And yet, if we were asked, what is the practice guide, what are the practice standards that you have to fulfil? What is the code of conduct going to actually be? How do I not breach that? You could not tell from this legislation. And it would be unusual, I think, to have legislation that imposes such a high impost and a high civil penalty upon a person, and yet at this stage of its development in the bill, you could not tell a person what they needed to do to comply. So that's a massive failure as far as we're concerned. But the other failure, as I said, is this: the issue that the pricing is disconnected totally from this code of conduct and quality framework.
So what would you like to see? Okay, well, I'll actually go back a step, because in your opening statement, you said that there was no consultation. That was right?
Well, there was no consultation. We put in a submission to the DSS about the code of conduct, but nobody has ever come back to us. And the DSS in its own submission says, in relation to the practice standards, they've created a technical reference group to develop those practice standards, and they've included the Department of Health, the NDIA, Disabled People's Organisation and the employer organisation, the NDIS, but noticeably there's not any input being asked for from any employee or employee organisation. That is a massive failure. This is imposing big penalties on people for failure to comply, and they're not even being asked for their opinion. And we have, probably 50 years of expertise, if not more, sitting here, who could easily put, and that's 3 people out of our thousands of members. Nobody's been asked about it.
So, have you provided any? So you put your submission in, and you had no feedback whatsoever.
No feedback whatsoever.
And have you made any comment on that technical group, I think you called it?
No, well, we've learnt of its existence from the submission by the Department of Social Security. That's how we learnt about it. Apparently, workers are not stakeholders. Apparently, there are organisations who represent them who have made more submissions on the NDIS than I care to number, are not relevant stakeholders.
So what would you like to see in the legislation that would that needs to be in the legislation around the role of training and professional development?
Well, we really think that there should be a further commissioner. We think there should be a quality commissioner. We think that somebody's task should be to look at the quality standards and the training that should be developed, and how the workforce are going to be supported. We think that the legislation should be less on the commissions should be less punitive and more supportive of the frontline workers, so that they can deliver for their customers and their clients who they are devoted to. That's what we think. We think that it would be a major change and a focus on how that would provide a clear indication to the workforce and to people with disability that quality and workers are incredibly important.
So from the support workers here, we heard about training or non-training. I just wondered, in terms of access to training, if you could just further explain how it comes about in your workplace, if it does.
I think that's going to vary across organisations quite dramatically, and it's also going to vary across regions and the type of service that is being provided, especially when you consider some are what you would call high-risk services with positive behaviour support plans and everything. So I think it's a difficult question to answer because it really varies. Yeah.
Sorry, Senator Brown. Senator Seward does need to leave soon, so
sorry.
we'll pass to her and we can.
Senator Brown's actually asked some of the questions I was going to follow up. I did just want to go to the procedural fairness issue because I think it's absolutely critical issue. Could you just outline a little bit further about how you think that issue could be addressed? I understand the importance of it, but how do you think it could be addressed in the legislation? I'm happy to hear.
One way you could do it would be to put a reference that the practice standards or the code of conduct, any investigation arising out of those two rules need to include an element of procedural fairness, and whether you wanted to expand on that in great detail in the legislation or whether you just wanted to make it a requirement of the rules.
Yeah.
That's
So
a matter
you're basically name checking it in there
I
to
think that's
say
right.
it's a key element of the process.
That's right.
Has to involve procedural fairness.
In
So
the Fair Work Act, for example, it just name checks the idea of procedural fairness in the course of an unfair dismissal application, and you could do something similar in this legislation.
Yeah. Okay.
So the legislation, this current legislation does talk about that, not in, I think it's not deregistering, but in
Banning orders.
Banning orders. It goes into great
Yeah.
depth, but we think, yes, if you call it out, that would be the way to go.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Senator Brown, did you?
I do have a comment about worker screening.
Yeah. It's got to be consistent across the country, and it has to be able to be understood. And we also think that screening might need to be at sort of different levels of screening. So not one size fits all depending on what you do in disabilities, but there might be different types of screening or different, for want of a better word, qualifications that you need to have in a regime of screening. We think, although we don't think they're perfect, we think that the kind of regime in the vulnerable persons screening in the ACT or the blue card system in Queensland has a regime which is graduated, and we think that is not a bad way to go because we don't think one size fits all. We think, and it depends on the position and the type of activity the person would undertake with a person with disability.
So a tiered system.
Tier system is what we think. But again, the way the Code of Conduct operates, it does seem to suggest that in screening, if you do something wrong, colloquially, that somehow the screening unit will change or put a note on your file. And we, again, think procedural fairness is extremely important if that is to occur. If it's going to affect your livelihood, you need to be in a position to be able to address what's put to you, what's put on your file, put on screening.
So, with the legislation before us, do you have any other concerns? We've heard a lot of concerns in the hearings of the evidence that we've received about the ministerial power. Have you had a look at that?
I can't say we have, but I can take that on notice and give you an opinion if we have one.
Okay, all right. I think that's all the questions I have.
Well, thank you all very much for your attendance tonight. Answers to the question you just took on notice will be needed by Friday the 8th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.